This is Florida Gulf Coast University.
Literature, translated literally, is an acquaintance with letters. That acquaintance starts in our elementary, middle, and high schools, and for many continues through college. But in a society focused on careers, is the study of literature relevant? What difference does an acquaintance with letters make in getting a job or becoming socially successful? We'll hear from a panel of experts in the field on this edition of FGCU Perspectives. Our guests, Myra Mendible, Professor and Chair of the Language and Literature Department at Florida Gulf Coast University. Rebecca Totaro is Professor of English at FGCU and also a published author. James Brock, Professor of English at FGCU, who is also a published poet. And Tom DeMarchi, English Instructor and Director of the Sanibel Island Writers Conference. Is literature relevant as a subject to be taught to today's youth?
Oh, absolutely so. For our youth in particular, exposure to the literary arts helps them become better thinkers, better readers, obviously, and better writers. And all those skills are very important to be a successful individual in business, in life, and having friends.
Myra, defense of literature as an education?
It opens the world of experience, I think, for students in ways that even film doesn't, in that film gives you the visual image, but reading the words on a page allows the individual reader to formulate ideas about how this individual character thinks, what motivates their behavior. And those, of course, are important qualities in interpersonal relationships in the workplace and trying to understand relations with others and what motivates human behaviors.
Rebecca, your thoughts on the defense of literature?
Well, I've long thought of the study of literature as an international passport, and it's never been more the case with English being used as the language for communication, particularly with the internet now. So our students, our children, when we travel abroad, we do have that. That's the number one passport, really, to the world, as Myra was saying.
And Tom, the defense, again, of literature as an educational pursuit.
Well, I mean, I guess I would defend it in the same way that I would defend eating a healthy diet and exercising. I mean, you can't necessarily draw a correlation between the study of literature and career success. It's not going to guarantee that it will impact your job, but I think it will impact you as a person, and it'll give your life more meaning. And it will foster creativity and curiosity and empathy, which I think are important no matter what field you go into.
Let me give you paint you a person. Somebody makes it all the way through their youth into adulthood, never being exposed to literature. They never learned about literature. They read voraciously, read magazines, read newspapers, read trade publications. They read how-to books. They read history books. They're very well read, but they've never been exposed to literature. What's wrong with this person?
Well, this person is probably very successful in life. I have family members that would describe them very accurately, and they're perfectly healthy and happy and successful in their lives. What I see sad about that is that they haven't ventured very far into the imaginative arts, and that they've maybe limit sometimes the way that they might be able to view the world. Reading literature is different from reading a history book in that you invest yourself differently into a work of literature or the work of imagination. It's a little bit of what Myra was saying. When you have that time alone and in that quiet, it requires discipline and concentration and an exercise and a willingness to exercise your imagination as you're reading about these other people's lives. And that's not to say that that doesn't occur in some of these other works, but this is what really marks imaginative literature.
Right. I mean, so often the kind of reading that the person who doesn't read literature is reading is with a specific literature or a material with a specific end in mind. so that the goal is already assumed. I'm going to read this business book to get better in my career. I'm going to read this self-help book so that I don't keep dating the same men, whatever it may be. And a work of literature, typically, I think you pick it up for the discovery of it. And it happens as you go. And that's part of why I heard other people talking about maybe empathy and imagination, certainly, that you leave yourself open to the possibility you couldn't have imagined for yourself. And I think that's what's so compelling. And it is truly an adventure that prepares you for all sorts of other adventures along the way.
Actually, Aristotle spoke to this same connection when he said that the difference between history and literature is that history can provide you with the facts of events, but literature makes those events come to life. It allows you to experience them through another subjective lens, and I think that's crucial for, again, that development of empathy. And in fact, there is evidence that shows that people who are literature readers, not just readers in general, but who read fiction, in fact, tend to be the ones that volunteer more in their communities, give more to their communities, are much more engaged in their communities.
Take that same imaginary person who had never been exposed to literature and give them the exposure, let them read, but don't offer them the education about the literature. What's that person lacking? What do they miss having not learned about the literature?
Well, I think you miss the shared experience of reading the same work in a classroom full of other people. If literature has any value, I would say that it engages the imagination, it engages the intellect, and every person becomes an active participant in the story. Any person who picks up a book, anybody who picks up Shakespeare, anybody who picks up F. Scott Fitzgerald, anybody who picks up Alice Munro, is going to bring their own experience, their own morals, their own values to that piece of literature. And so in a sense, they are co-authors. And Myra was bringing up film. If I watch a film, even the best film in the world, is a finished product. And I have to ride along with the director's vision, and I can only view the characters in that movie based on how the actors look. Whereas if I'm engaging a book, I'm the director, in a sense, or anybody reading that book is a director and gets to do central casting and gets to know when certain things are emphasized. And if you read a beautiful paragraph or a beautiful passage, you get to go back and reread it and experience it again and pause to contemplate it and to kind of perceive it in different ways. And to bring it back to the classroom and the person who maybe reads on his or her own based against somebody who's in a classroom, you get the teacher's perspective, you get all of your classmates' perspective, and they get yours, which is invaluable. It's a cliche, but I learned so much from my students. And every year I think my teaching kind of goes up a little bit of a level only because I'm stealing great ideas from all of my students every semester. When they have perspectives on the stuff we read, I incorporate that into my curriculum in future semesters.
And just to add to that, I mean, people who read by themselves often seek out other communities, book clubs, even writers groups and such, where they are excited about these ideas and they look for avenues in which they can talk about that, whether that's on an online community or meeting down at your local bookstore and talking just about the books.
And I think that is actually the draw. I lead novel night at the Fort Myers Barnes & Noble here, and it's a once-a-month meeting, not required. People come from the community to read a book that we've selected each month and have the conversation. And I firmly have believed for the last 10, 11 years I've been doing this book club, is that they come because they know they might have certain opinions of their own that they've derived through this imaginative, empathetic experience alone through contemplation. They bring it to the community and they leave changed. And I don't mean always, certainly it's rare that they are changed their whole lives, but their ideas change and they go, gosh darn, I came into that despising this character in this novel, or thinking that that choice that that character made to give up a child or whatever the thing might be was the wrong choice. And now I see it differently. It's an amazing experience. And actually, as Myra, as we all know, it can be thought of as the foundation of a democratic society.
Absolutely. There's a direct correlation between literacy and democracies. Absolutely. And you look at totalitarian regimes, when they go to power, what's one of the first things they do? They ban books, they burn books, they prevent certain people in their culture based on class or gender to not become literate. So there's something scary about someone who is informed through literature, through reading, and empowering about that. And you know, there's nothing. It's easier to control people if they're ignorant.
And to control how the work is to be interpreted and read, so that it is read in one particular way. And that's why that another aspect of this is the critical thinking that's involved here. You know, when you're, there's nothing wrong with curling up at some evening and reading the book by yourself. That's a fabulous experience. But you're reading that book through your own lens. And we all have our blind spots. We are positioned in a particular way based on our upbringing, our culture, et cetera. And so being able to exchange ideas and interpretations with others and impressions with others opens up multiple perspectives for us and allows us to see things in ways that perhaps we would have been blind to otherwise. And so that makes it almost a social ritual as well.
Is the teaching of literature different today than it was, you know, pick your time period ago, 20 years ago? Is it? How's it different?
It's hugely different. I mean, it's what Tom's saying, that he learns so much from his students, and he wants to take what they've said and maybe it changes the way his teaching goes. The fact that we come together as a community in the classroom, and 15, 20 years ago, certainly when I was in school, we got the lecture from the professor. That's one of the ways that it's changed anyway.
And of certain, I think that there was less concern about the variety of ways that a work or a character can be interpreted, and the role that one's own perspective and one's own subjective response to the character or the events may play in shaping how we view those events and how we judge those events and those characters. I think that we're much more receptive today to the possibility that one character can be viewed in multiple ways and for different reasons.
Are the same works still taught?
Right, that's another one.
It's 20 years ago.
Well, no, yes, I mean quite so. That we still very much work with a very traditional canon, but I think our notion of what makes the canon, the idea of what a great literary masterwork might be, those ideas certainly have been challenged. And it's not that we no longer read Shakespeare. Rebecca brings Shakespeare to her classes almost not exclusively, but a great deal. And even in a contemporary literature class that I might teach, I will go back to some classic piece of literature. I'm doing actually a canonical piece right now, 20th century Waiting for Godot, but the starting point there is Shakespeare. From the get-go with that. And so the students who've had some exposure to Shakespeare, and most of my students have in that class, they pick up a lot of things that they wouldn't have otherwise, even though much of that play is maybe exploiting or even satirizing or subverting some of the assumptions that we might think of in terms of classical theater.
So you're talking about, you know, how teaching of literature might be different today than it was, you know, not too long ago. A lot of the works are still the same. What about the future? What's ahead for you know, learning literature?
Well, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, for about 500 years, you know, since the mid-15th century, we were a reading culture. You know, since Gutenberg. Think about all the revolutions that happened. We had the Renaissance, we had the Reformation, we had the Enlightenment. And then all of a sudden we had this huge technological revolution and the Industrial Revolution. And really just in the last maybe 20 years, especially with computers, but certainly, you know, 50 years with television, the way that people read and regard books has shifted, I think. And that's not to say that people don't read anymore. In fact, my students might write more now than I did when I was in college, but they're doing it in very discrete, tiny bits, and they're doing it on their text messaging through their cell phone. They're doing it through Facebook and instant messaging. And so it's clear that they're trying to stay connected with others through narrative, through perhaps their own lives' narratives. But I don't know what the future will be for literature, but I do know that now in my class, there's an expectation that we utilize this technology in a way that I never did in college 20 years ago. Nobody in my college classroom ever said, can we watch the movie based on this book. We read the book and we talked about the book.
What's exciting though is, and we were talking before we got started about Nook and Kindle, these technologies that are allowing us to take novels wherever we want to go, and add to that the success of the Harry Potter franchise, which began as books, the Twilight series, which began as books. Of course, they become movies, but they began as reading communities. That's very exciting, and I think the future is bright for literature that looks different, sounds different, but still engages people in all the ways we were just talking about. I mean, the field has only expanded. It hasn't at all contracted. So I think, you know, our jobs are secure. But the future looks good, I think.
But 50 or 100 years from now, will people in your chairs look back at you know, this period in time and see movies and television as the literature, or as part of the literature of today?
I think that the delivery methods of the written text will vary in ways that we can't even imagine today, and perhaps the levels of engagement of the reader and the text will change as well. The readers creating their own endings, adding and changing the plot, that kind of thing, making it more interactive. That's a possibility. Multiple endings, readers get to pick which ending they like. I can envision that sort of thing. But our need for the text, our need for reading, I think endures. I don't think that will go away. Again, if we take it back to a kind of classical foundation in defense of literature, it's this need for imitation, the need to see and observe other people's behaviors, other people's lives. We have reality television today that's trying to kind of create that, but it doesn't meet the need in the deep psychological way that the written. Psychological
and biological. I mean, we are evolutionarily created to read and write and to tell stories.
And one slight contrary angle on this is you know, poetry, for one, has rarely been in the center of mainstream culture. And I kind of like it that way, actually. But that we turn to poetry in times when we want to commemorate something, to celebrate something. We read poems at weddings, at christenings. We read poems at funerals.
This week, 9/11, for example.
Exactly. And so there are times when we turn to that kind of language that doesn't really serve a purpose, isn't really practical, but it answers something very deep within us. And poetry is one of those places where we go to have that kind of quiet, that kind of reflection. And again, it can involve community as well.
There may not actually be anything else. I was thinking about this, that there may not be anything else that does the movement we've been talking about, which is deep contemplation, where you're alone and you're really doing something that's outside of society, perhaps even dangerous to it, and then bringing it into community for it to be perhaps transformative there. I don't know what else does that movement. It used to be music, when people played their own instruments at home, but I think now it's reading and writing. And poetry in particular.
And I would also stress what you pointed out with the biological. I mean, that's, you know, brain science is telling us that something is going on in the brain that is unique when you're reading. And there's a development of IQ, a development of, you know, your certain faculties that doesn't happen, frankly, with other forms of leisure or engagement. So I think that science, interesting, you know, the arts and sciences, I think that science will also serve a purpose in keeping literature alive by showing that it's not just something that people do for fun or just entertainment, that it actually has quantifiable benefits to the human brain.
Absolutely. I mean, the human animal is a narrative machine. I mean, and as you said, we're kind of biologically designed to create and use language and to use symbol. I mean, words on a page aren't the things themselves.
Right.
We are interpreting them. We're using metaphor and symbol to make meaning. And again, that engages our imagination, which lights up different parts of your brain and helps you discover parts of yourself you might not have known were there otherwise. It's like the words are little keys that open doors, and you kind of discover your humanity, I think, as you're reading. And I think it's really important to come back to empathy. I mean, that's the thing that I stress in my classes. I'm constantly saying, you know, they have a word for people who are unable or unwilling to imagine the suffering of others, and that's sociopath. And you know, I mean, reading isn't the only way to have compassion and empathy for others, but it's a really good way. I think it's been road tested, and I think it's pretty solid.
It's good practice, and for ethics as well. Harvard Business School and other schools across the United States and internationally use literature to train their business students in ethics, because they can try out scenarios in a harmless way, and their students aren't sitting watching the taped versions of interactions of humans. They're taking on these full-fledged characters. And so it's used to teach ethics for the same reasons.
So in that case, it's a good way of being able to write down the way somebody feels, or an experience that they're having. I'm always surprised how much I know from reading fiction. And it's not the made-up part that I know. It's the the historical references, or the society references, things that were true in the book. They were real. That's got to be an important part of the education.
Oh, it's an archaeological excavation that you're going through when you're reading texts that are even just 30 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. You get insight into how people lived. But then you also see incredible commonalities, even when there's these great divides over time, and it's humbling actually to see. Maybe we haven't gone that far, even though we think we might have. We're still stuck in the same old problems, and maybe that's reassuring too. I don't know.
We talked about readers. Talk about writers. Obviously, people who get a good education in literature can become, and probably do quite often, become writers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have an instructor, and I've been wanting to mention Diane Cox as one of our wonderful instructors, professors at the university, and she talks about tapping her way to the top, paying attention to the thesis, so what's your main point, the audience, so the T, the A, and the P, what's your purpose for writing, and that her success in business, in the business world and nonprofit organizations before coming to teach for us was, she says, tapping to the top, using the writing that she was doing to really speak to a particular audience and make her case. She said she learned that being an English major, and that's the importance of the written part, is that a degree in English that teaches you really paying attention to audience does open every door. It's human beings, know your audience.
Exactly. And it's a conversation. If you're paying attention to audience, if you're thinking about your audience, just bringing it back to reading, when you're reading a book, the best books, you're having a conversation with it. And when you're writing a book, if you're thinking about audience, or you're really paying attention to your characters, if you're being honest and you're portraying them in an honest, true way, then they are going to speak to others when people read about them. And again, that will help people, the readers, discover themselves better. And I think the writer is transformed while writing as well. There's that great quotation, how do I know what I think until I see what I've written? It is a way of thinking, just as speaking is a way of thinking. So I think the two go hand in hand. I think, every writer is first a reader and wants to capture the same feeling that they felt when they read a book. They want to kind of pass that on to other readers through their own imaginations.
We talked about a career-focused society. Does an education in literature provide somebody sort of, I don't want to say springboard, but an entry into the work world, the business of success?
My general practitioner and my gastroenterologist were both English majors, so there may be a springboard into a medical career. I don't know, but the things that we've been talking about in terms of empathy, but also good critical thinking skills, are certainly challenged and nurtured by being a reader. That you have to exercise those skills if you're going to be fully engaged as a reader, and creative as a reader as well.
And I think it's a misconception that people think that somehow you get an undergraduate degree in English and that makes you not good for business. And in fact, I remember reading that a majority of Fortune 500 CEOs actually had undergraduate degrees in English. And so obviously it is having an effect on people's ability to be persuasive, to communicate well, to think critically, to problem solve. I mean, I think all of these are aspects of the education in an undergraduate and graduate education in English.
Yeah. I mean, I think a BA in English and an MA in English are recognized around the world now. Those are degrees that people understand, will get them someone in their company or in their nonprofit organization, in their law firm, who knows how to communicate, who knows who their audience is. I mean, this is it's really quite basic, and so it's a pleasure to, I think, for us to be given a chance to talk about literature in its practical forms as much as in its transformative, maybe more rarefied air forms.
Exactly, and there was a book written a few years ago by Daniel Pink called In the Right Mind, or I'm getting the title wrong, but basically this guy is a business writer, and the entire premise of his book was MFAs are the future CEOs of this country. People who have masters in fine arts, people who are really tapped into how to create narratives, how to tell stories. I mean, the advertising business has known this for years. They really know how to create a narrative, to create a scenario where we are buying into a story being sold to us, and so we buy products associated with that story. And he's saying that these are the skills that you learn from reading and writing literature are the ones that are going to be most valuable to business in the future, more so than accounting.
I'll stop you on that thought. That's our program for today. Thanks to our guests for participating, and thanks to you for watching this edition of FGCU Perspectives.